Somewhere right now, someone is arguing about who the greatest basketball player of all time is. Voices rise. Old highlights get replayed frame by frame. Career stats get recited like scripture. Strangers online are typing in all caps about a game they never played, defending a man they have never met as if his legacy were their own. It feels like a modern habit, something invented by sports networks and comment sections and endless scrolling late at night. But the real answer is far stranger than that. Your brain was never built to rank athletes. It was built to rank something much older and much more dangerous. And the argument you keep having about who is the greatest of all time is just that ancient machinery, still running, still humming in the background, just pointed at a basketball court instead of a hunting party. Start with a simple fact. Every human group that has ever existed has had a hierarchy. Not always a king or a boss. Sometimes just an invisible sense of who matters more in a room, who speaks first at a meeting, who gets imitated without anyone admitting it, who gets forgiven faster when they make a mistake. Where did that instinct come from? The primatologist Frans de Waal spent years observing a colony of chimpanzees at Burger Zoo in the Netherlands, and what he documented reads less like animal behavior and more like a political thriller. Alliances formed overnight. Betrayals happened in daylight. A dominant male lost his position not through raw strength alone, but through coalition, patience, and timing. De Waal called the pattern chimpanzee politics, and the term was not a joke or a metaphor. He was demonstrating that ranking individuals by power is not a human invention. It is a primate inheritance, something written into the social operating system of any species that lives in groups and needs to know, quickly and constantly, who can hurt them and who can help them. That is the first kind of hierarchy: dominance, strength, size, the raw ability to punish or protect. But here is where it gets interesting, because at some point in human evolution, your ancestors built a second kind of hierarchy on top of the first one. And this second kind is the one that actually explains your goat debates. The anthropologist Joseph Henrich has spent much of his career studying how culture spreads across generations, and one of his most important findings is that humans do not just rank each other by force. Humans rank each other by prestige. Prestige works differently from dominance. You do not follow a prestigious person because you fear them. You follow them because you believe they know something you do not. Henrich's research suggests this created an entirely new evolutionary pressure, one that no other primate faces in quite the same way. Early humans who could correctly identify the best hunter, the best toolmaker, the best storyteller, and then copy that person's exact methods, out-survived humans who copied randomly or copied whoever simply yelled the loudest. Your ancestors who were skilled at spotting genuine excellence passed on more of their genes. The ones who could not tell excellence from noise generally did not. Read that again slowly. Identifying the greatest was never entertainment. It was survival software, running quietly in the background of every decision your ancestors made about who to trust. So when you argue about the greatest basketball player who ever lived, you are not doing something frivolous, no matter how it looks from the outside. You are running a program that once decided who got fed and who did not, who learned the right skill in time and who starved learning the wrong one. Think about what that actually means. Somewhere in a small band of early humans, tens of thousands of years ago, there was a person whose spear throw never seemed to miss, whose fire never seemed to go out, whose tracking never seemed to lose the trail through rock or river. And everyone nearby was watching that person, closely, constantly, not out of fear, out of hunger to absorb what they knew before the knowledge was lost. Why does that instinct still feel so good today, so many thousands of years later? The psychologist Leon Festinger gave us part of the answer in 1954 when he proposed what became known as social comparison theory. Festinger argued that humans carry an inbuilt drive to evaluate themselves by measuring against others, and that this drive sharpens specifically around ability and performance rather than around random traits. You rarely compare yourself to a stranger's mood. You compare yourself, and by extension your whole tribe, to the outer edge of what is humanly possible. The greatest of all time is not simply a title handed out for fun. It functions as a boundary marker. It tells your brain exactly how far human ability can stretch under real pressure. And once that boundary is fixed, you instinctively measure everyone else against it, including, quietly, yourself. This is why the debate never actually settles anything, and never really tries to. A final verdict would end the comparison completely. And the comparison, not the verdict, is the entire point of the exercise. But there is a twist buried in all of this, and it is the part almost nobody expects walking into the conversation. For most of human history, That spear-throwing, fire-keeping expert was not treated the way you might imagine, showered only with praise and status. The anthropologist Christopher Bohm spent decades studying foraging societies, from the Kalahari to the Arctic Circle, and found something almost universal across cultures that had never met each other. Hunter-gatherer bands actively worked to cut their most impressive members back down to size. A hunter who bragged about a kill could expect mockery, silence, or quiet exclusion until he learned to downplay his own success. Bohm called this pattern a reverse dominance hierarchy. The group collectively suppressed anyone who tried to convert prestige into control over others. So your ancestors needed to identify the greatest among them in order to survive. And at the very same time, in the very same breath, they needed to prevent that person from becoming a tyrant over the group. Admiration and suppression, running side by side, in the same small bands, for nearly the entire span of human history before cities and kings existed at all. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it is exactly what happens in every sports debate you have ever sat through. The same crowd that builds a player up into a living legend spends just as much energy hunting for his flaws. Too selfish. Not clutch when it counted most. Padded his stats against weak opponents. Never faced the toughest competition of a rival era. This is not hypocrisy, even though it looks like it from the outside. It is Bohm's reverse dominance hierarchy, replaying itself in real time, on a screen, about a person the vast majority of the crowd will never meet in person. You are not simply asking who is the best. You are enforcing the ancient, unspoken rule that no one gets to be the best without being questioned for it first. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you a little. None of this requires you to even like sports. The debate itself is doing something useful for your brain, regardless of which side eventually wins the argument. Arguing about the greatest of all time forces your mind to define what excellence actually looks like, to sort through conflicting evidence, to weigh different eras against one another, to decide which qualities matter most when so many things could matter. That is the exact cognitive exercise your ancestors ran when deciding whose hunting technique deserved to be copied. You are not wasting an evening when you argue about this online. You are training the same evaluative circuitry that once decided who your ancestors trusted with their lives. And this explains something that reaches far beyond basketball entirely. Why do humans build monuments to conquerors, name universities after scientists, replay the same championship highlights for decades after the final buzzer sounded? Because the greatest of all time is never really about the individual being ranked. It is about the group that gets to claim that person as their own. When you argue that a player from your favorite team is the greatest to ever play the game, you are not merely praising a stranger in an arena. You are asserting that your judgment, your standards, your tribe's particular taste in excellence, deserves to be the version that history ultimately remembers. That is a very old kind of stake to hold in an argument. It has almost nothing to do with basketball, and almost everything to do with belonging to something larger than yourself. And once you notice this pattern in basketball, you cannot stop seeing it everywhere else. The same argument plays out over the greatest guitarist, the greatest chef, the greatest general in military history. Every single one of these debates follows the identical shape. A candidate rises. The group praises the candidate's skill in obsessive detail. Then, almost on cue, the group turns and starts hunting for the exact flaw that keeps the candidate from being untouchable. Was the guitarist really that original, or did he borrow from someone less famous? Did the general win because he was brilliant, or because his opponent made a careless mistake? You are not being cynical when you ask these questions. You are running Henrich's prestige detector and Bohm's reverse dominance hierarchy at the exact same time, on autopilot, the way your ancestors ran both systems around a fire without ever once being taught to. Even your workplace runs on this same wiring, whether anyone admits it or not. Notice how a new hire who seems unusually talented gets watched closely by everyone else in the room, copied in small ways, and quietly resented if that talent starts to look like it comes with too much power attached. Praise and suspicion arriving together, inseparable. That is not office politics being petty. That is Bohm's ancient hunter-gatherer band, wearing a lanyard. So the next time you find yourself deep in a debate about who deserves the crown, pay attention to what your body is actually doing while you argue. Notice how much it matters, on some level, that other people agree with you. Notice how personally you take it when they refuse to. That feeling is not really about statistics or championship rings. It is a survival instinct, dressed up in modern clothing, still asking the exact question it has always asked around every fire your species has ever gathered around. Who do we trust? Who do we copy? Who, out of everyone available, actually deserves to lead? Somewhere right now, someone is arguing about who the greatest basketball player of all time is. And it turns out they were never really talking about basketball at all. They were doing precisely what their ancestors did around a fire, tens of thousands of years before any of this existed, deciding, together, who among them had earned the right to be followed.